The sun hung low over the Montana horizon, painting the Willow Creek Valley in shades of amber and rust. September of 1875 had arrived with the promise of early frost, and Ethan Holloway could feel winter's warning in the evening air. He knelt in the dirt beside the stable, his calloused hands steady as he guided young Tommy Reeves through the delicate work of checking a mare's hoof for stones. "See there, boy, feel along the frog gentle-like. Horse'll tell you if something's wrong." Tommy, 12 years old and eager as a pup, pressed his fingers where Ethan showed him. The mare, a gentle bay named Stella, shifted her weight but didn't pull away. Trust. That's what Ethan had taught the boy over the past year and a half. Trust between man and beast was earned through patience, not force. The boy's face lit up with understanding. "I feel it. There's a pebble lodged right there." "Good. Now work it free, slow and steady." Ethan straightened, pressing a hand to the small of his back. 33 years old, and already feeling the weight of a decade's hard labor in his bones. The ranch had been built from nothing. Every fence post driven by his own hands, every board of the house hewn and fitted through sweat and determination. 5 years since he'd filed his claim under the Homestead Act. 5 years of proving this land of breaking soil and taming wilderness. 3 years since Grace had left him. 3 years of working himself to exhaustion each day so he might sleep without dreams. Tommy freed the stone with a triumphant grunt, and Stella nickered her appreciation. The boy's grin was pure sunshine, the kind of innocent joy that reminded Ethan why he'd taken in this orphan when the sheriff came calling. Some men were meant to pass on what they knew. Some men needed a reason beyond themselves to keep pushing forward. That's when Ethan spotted the silhouette. A lone figure stood at the gate perhaps 200 yards distant, where the rutted trail from town met the boundary of his property. The lowering sun made it impossible to discern details, but something in the stillness of that form set his instincts humming. A woman, he thought, judging by the shape of the dress and the way she held herself straight-backed despite obvious travel weariness. His right hand dropped instinctively to the Colt Navy revolver on his hip. Old habits from the war, from years of cavalry service that had carved themselves into muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. Out here, 8 miles from the nearest neighbor and another 6 beyond that to Willow Creek proper, strangers rarely brought good news. "Mr. Ethan." Tommy had noticed his attention shift. Someone at the gate. "I see her." Ethan kept his voice level, not wanting to alarm the boy, but there was caution in his tone. "Stay behind me." They walked together toward the fence line, Ethan's long strides eating the distance while Tommy half-trotted to keep pace. The mare, forgotten the evening chores, suddenly secondary to this unexpected arrival. As they drew closer, details emerged from the amber light. A traveling dress well made but dusty from the road. A leather satchel clutched in both hands like it contained something precious or dangerous. Blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, though tendrils had escaped to frame a face that was young but careworn. And those eyes. God in heaven, those eyes. Ethan stopped walking so abruptly that Tommy nearly collided with him. Green eyes the color of spring grass after rain, set in a face that was achingly familiar and impossibly wrong. For one heart-stopping moment he thought he was seeing a ghost. Thought that 3 years of grief and guilt had finally broken something in his mind and conjured Grace from memory into flesh. But this woman was not Grace. Her jaw was stronger, her shoulders squared in a way Grace's never had been. There was steel in her gaze where Grace had carried gentleness. This was someone else, someone he'd never met but recognized all the same from photographs Grace had kept in a small wooden box by their bed. "State your business." The words came out harder than he'd intended, but Ethan's heart was hammering against his ribs. "This is private property." The woman lifted her chin, meeting his challenge without flinching. When she spoke, her voice carried the careful diction of education and the cold edge of controlled anger. "Ethan Holloway. I'm Claire Bennett, Grace's sister. I've come a long way to say what needs saying." The name struck him like a physical blow. Claire. The younger sister, the one Grace had spoken of with equal parts love and exasperation. The schoolteacher in San Francisco, the one who'd written exactly twice after Grace left both letters formal and filled with barely veiled accusations. Tommy tugged at Ethan's sleeve, confusion written across his freckled face. Mr. Ethan, who's Miss Grace? Someone from a long time ago. Ethan's throat felt tight, the words scraping past some obstruction he couldn't name. Get to the barn, Tommy. Finish checking the rest of the horses. We'll talk later. The boy hesitated, curiosity warring with obedience, but years of hard-won trust won out. He nodded and retreated, casting glances back over his shoulder as he went. Smart kid. Knew when adults needed privacy, even if he didn't understand why. Ethan turned his attention back to Claire Bennett. Up close, the differences were more apparent. Grace had been soft in ways this woman was not. Grace had smiled easily, had found joy in small things like wildflowers and birdsong. This woman before him looked like she hadn't smiled genuinely in years, like life had taken a file to her edges and sharpened them to points. Why are you here? He pushed open the gate, the hinges protesting with a rust-roughened squeal. After 3 years, why now? Claire stepped through, and he caught the scent of travel dust and lavender soap. She was tired, he realized. Not just from the journey, but from something deeper, something that lived in the tight lines around her mouth and the shadows beneath those too familiar eyes. Because there are things you need to know. She paused, seemed to gather herself. About Grace, about how she died, about why she left in the first place. The world tilted slightly. Grace died 3 years ago. I got the telegram. November 1872. Consumption, they said. Quick at the end. That's what they told you. Claire's voice remained steady, but something flickered in her expression. But there's more to the story. Grace wanted you to know. Before she died, she made me promise. 2 things. First, to bring you her letters. Second, to tell you the truth. Ethan felt his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. For 3 years he'd built walls around the memory of his wife, had buried his grief beneath back-breaking labor and careful isolation, had convinced himself that she'd left because he'd failed her in some fundamental way, and that accepting that failure was the only path to survival. Now here stood her sister, threatening to tear those walls down brick by careful brick. I don't need to hear this. But even as he said it, Ethan knew he was lying. She left. That's all that matters. Is it? Claire's eyes narrowed. Then why do you still wear your wedding ring? His hand moved unconsciously to the simple gold band on his left hand. He'd tried to take it off exactly once 3 months after Grace disappeared. Had stood in this very yard with the ring pinched between thumb and forefinger, ready to throw it into the creek. Instead, he'd slipped it back on and never attempted removal again. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through prairie grass. Finally, Ethan gestured toward the house with his chin. It's getting dark. You'll need a place to stay tonight. Too dangerous to ride back to town after sunset. I didn't come here for hospitality. No, I expect you came here to tell me how I failed your sister. The bitterness in his own voice surprised him. But unless you plan to sleep in the dirt, you'll accept what's offered. Something shifted in Claire's expression. Surprise maybe, or a crack in whatever armor she'd worn for this confrontation. She nodded once, sharp and decisive, then followed him toward the ranch house. The structure was modest but solid, built from timber Ethan had cut and milled himself. 1 story, 3 rooms plus a loft that Tommy claimed as his own. The porch wrapped around the front, offering a view of the valley that had sold Ethan on this particular parcel when he'd first ridden through surveying unclaimed land after his discharge from the Army. In spring, wildflowers covered the meadow in a riot of color. Grace had loved that had spent hours sitting on this porch with her sketchbook, trying to capture the impossible beauty of Montana in bloom. Inside the house was clean but sparse. A man's space absent of softness or decoration beyond what was strictly practical. The main room served as kitchen and living area, both dominated by a cast-iron stove that Ethan kept meticulously maintained and a hand-hewn table that could seat 6, but had hosted only 1 for years. Tools hung on the walls with military precision. A Winchester rifle occupied the space above the door, loaded and ready. Land deeds and legal documents sat in neat stacks on a small desk by the window. Ethan busied himself with the practical rituals of hospitality, grateful for the distraction. He worked the hand pump at the sink, filling a kettle with cold creek water, then set it on the stove and stoked the coals to life. The movements were automatic, performed 1,000 times in the solitude of widowerhood. Claire remained standing near the door, still clutching that leather satchel like a lifeline. She surveyed the room with an evaluating gaze, and Ethan wondered what judgments she was forming. This house had been meant for a family. The extra rooms, the careful craftsmanship, the location chosen for its beauty as much as its practicality. All of it designed for a future that had died stillborn 3 years past. "You keep it clean," Claire observed, her tone neutral. "Not much else to do in the evenings." Ethan didn't look at her, focused instead on retrieving 2 tin cups from their hooks. "Coffee'll be ready in a few minutes." "I don't need coffee. I need to tell you why I'm here." "You've already said. Grace's letters. The truth." He finally turned to face her, fully crossing his arms over his chest. "But before you start, I need you to understand something, Miss Bennett. Your sister and I, what we had that's between her and me. Whatever your parents told you, whatever story you've carried all this time, it's just that. A story." Claire's eyes flashed with sudden anger, the first real emotion breaking through her careful control. "A story? Is that what you call it? My sister left you and went home to San Francisco in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back. She showed up on our doorstep broken, Miss Bennett. She wouldn't speak for days. When she finally did, all she said was that she couldn't be your wife anymore, that she'd failed you in ways that couldn't be fixed. She said that—" the words hit harder than any physical blow. "That she failed me. What else was she supposed to think?" Claire's voice rose slightly, the careful modulation cracking. "You lost a child. Your daughter. Grace told us how you'd wanted that baby, how you'd already built the nursery, how you'd chosen names. And then she was gone stillborn at 7 months. Grace said afterward you could barely look at her, that you'd work from dawn until you dropped from exhaustion rather than share a room with her." Ethan's hands had curled into fists without his conscious decision. His breathing had gone shallow, each inhalation feeling like it had to fight past broken glass in his throat. The memories Claire's words summoned were visceral and immediate. Grace's screams during that endless night, Doc Harrison's grim face, the tiny, perfect body of their daughter, blue and silent, the way Grace had looked at him afterward like she was waiting for him to say it was her fault. He'd never said it, never thought it, but he hadn't known how to tell her that either. "Your parents don't know what happened," he managed finally. "They don't know what I said or didn't say, what I felt or didn't feel. They only know what Grace told them, and Grace was hurting too much to see straight." "Then tell me." Claire set the satchel on the table with deliberate care. "Tell me what really happened, because I need to know, Mr. Holloway. I need to understand why my sister spent 3 years dying slowly while refusing to come home to you." The kettle began to whistle steam, rising in a thin plume. Ethan turned away, needing the simple task of pouring water over coffee grounds to center himself. The aroma filled the small space, bitter and grounding. "She died 3 years ago," he said quietly. "You said November 1872. That's 3 years past. Why come now with letters and truth? What changed?" Claire was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its hard edge, replaced by something that sounded almost like grief. "Because I found out I was wrong about you. Because Grace wrote me letters, 2 different ones, and in them she told a story that didn't match what our parents had said. Because before she died she was asking for you, calling your name in her fever dreams. And because I made her a promise, and I keep my promises even when I don't want to." She reached into the satchel and withdrew a bundle wrapped in faded blue ribbon. Letters, perhaps 20 of them, varying in thickness and paper quality. The stack looked fragile, like something that had been carried a long distance and handled with obsessive care. "Grace wrote to you," Claire said, placing the bundle on the table between them. For 3 years after she left, she wrote. Every few months at first, then less frequently as the illness took hold. She never sent them. Said she was afraid you'd come out of duty, that you'd see what she'd become and hate her for it. But she kept writing anyway, kept trying to explain. Ethan stared at the letters like they might bite. 18 or 20 envelopes, he couldn't quite count, all addressed in Grace's familiar hand. Her name, his name dates spanning years. A chronicle of absence and silence given sudden voice. "I don't want them," he heard himself say. "I don't care what you want." Claire's tone had hardened again. "She died asking me to deliver these. She died believing you'd understand once you read them. She died with your name on her lips. So you're going to take them, Mr. Holloway, and you're going to read them, and you're going to let her speak from beyond the grave, because that's the least you owe her." The accusation hung between them, sharp and unforgiving. Ethan's pride rose to meet it, old anger finding new fuel. But beneath the anger was something else. Something that felt terribly like fear. Fear of what those letters might contain. Fear of having his careful numbness shattered. Fear of grief he'd never properly faced. "You think I owe her?" His voice came out rough. "I gave her everything I had. Built this place with my own hands so she'd have a home. Worked myself half to death so she'd want for nothing. And one morning I woke up to a note saying she couldn't do it anymore, that I should forget her and move on." 3 years of silence. "Miss Bennett, 3 years of wondering what I did wrong, what I should have done different. And now you show up with letters she wrote but never sent, and tell me I owe her." "Yes." Claire met his gaze without flinching. "Because she loved you enough to leave. Because she thought she was protecting you. And because you loved her enough to still wear that ring." The truth of it struck home. Ethan looked down at his left hand, at the worn gold band that had become as much a part of him as his own skin. He'd told himself he kept wearing it out of habit, out of some vague sense that removing it would be admitting defeat. But standing here in the presence of Grace's sister, facing the reality of those unread letters, he couldn't maintain the lie. He'd kept wearing it because some part of him had never stopped being married, had never stopped hoping that one day he'd understand why she left, had never stopped believing that somehow, in some way, he couldn't articulate, there was still something unfinished between them. The silence that fell was different now. Not hostile, but heavy with things neither of them quite knew how to say. Outside, full darkness had settled over the valley. Tommy would be finishing the evening chores, settling the horses for the night. The cattle would be bedding down in the south pasture. The rhythms of ranch life continued regardless of human drama. "It's late," Ethan said finally. "There's a room you can use. Was meant to be a nursery once. Never got used for that purpose. It's yours tonight." Claire nodded, exhaustion suddenly visible in the slump of her shoulders. The journey from San Francisco was long days by train and then stage, and she'd clearly pushed herself hard to get here. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Ethan picked up the bundle of letters, felt their weight in his hands. "You came here thinking I was the villain in your sister's story. Maybe after I read these you'll realize you had it right the first time. Maybe." Claire picked up her satchel again. "Or maybe we'll both learn something we didn't want to know." She moved toward the small room off the main living space, the one with the single bed and the empty cradle Ethan had never been able to bring himself to dismantle. He heard the door close softly, heard the creak of bed springs as she sat down. Then silence. Ethan stood alone in the kitchen, turning the bundle of letters over in his hands. The ribbon was silk, he realized. Expensive. The kind of thing Grace would have saved from some special occasion and repurposed because she couldn't bear to throw away anything beautiful. He could see her tying this bow, deciding that even letters never sent deserved to be treated with care. His fingers found the knot, began to work it loose, then stopped. Not yet. He wasn't ready yet. Instead, he set the bundle on the table and moved to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond. The Montana night was vast, and star-filled, the kind of sky that made a man feel small and insignificant in the best possible way. Grace had loved these nights, had dragged him out to the porch countless times to marvel at the sweep of the Milky Way, the occasional streak of a falling star. A knock at the door startled him from the memory. Tommy's voice tentative. "Mr. Ethan, you want me to do anything else before bed?" Ethan opened the door. The boy stood there in clothes still dusty from the day's work, his face showing the uncertainty of someone who knew something significant had happened but didn't understand what. "You're done for the night, son. Get yourself cleaned up and to bed. We'll start early tomorrow on that south fence." Tommy nodded but didn't move. "That lady, is she really Miss Grace's sister?" "She is. She looks like her, in that picture you keep, the one in the desk." Ethan had thought the photograph was hidden tucked away in a drawer Tommy would have no reason to open. Apparently the boy was more observant than given credit for. "Yeah, she does." "Is she staying just tonight?" "Oh." Tommy scuffed his boot against the porch boards. "I liked Miss Grace, from what you told me about her. Sounded like she was real nice." Something in Ethan's chest twisted. He told the boy very little, just enough to explain why he lived alone, why there were 2 names carved on the wooden cross in the small plot beyond the barn. Their daughter, Grace's mother who'd died in childbirth before Ethan ever met her, the dead whose memories haunted this place. "She was," Ethan said softly. "Now get on. Morning comes early." After Tommy left, Ethan locked the door and banked the fire in the stove. He moved through the evening routine with mechanical precision, every action familiar and comforting in its predictability. But his eyes kept returning to that bundle of letters on the table, that ribbon still half untied. Finally, as the house settled into the quiet creaks and sighs of night, he carried the letters to his bedroom. The space was as spare as the rest of the house, a bed built for 2 that now held 1, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a single oil lamp. He lit the lamp, adjusted the wick for a steady flame, and sat on the edge of the bed with the letters in his lap. His hands were shaking. Ethan Holloway, who'd faced Confederate cavalry charges without flinching, who'd broken wild horses and tamed raw land, who'd endured 3 years of solitude without complaint, found his hands shaking as he untied a silk ribbon. The first letter was dated March 1872, 6 months after Grace had left. The envelope was good quality paper, the kind her father's money could afford. His name was written in her careful script across the front, but there was no address. Never meant to be sent, just written and saved. Ethan slid out the pages, unfolded them, and began to read. "My dearest Ethan, I am writing from Father's house in San Francisco, though I know I shall never post this letter. How does a woman tell her husband that she fled not from his cruelty, but from her own cowardice? The baby, we lost our daughter. I was certain in my heart it was a girl. I see her face every night when I close my eyes. Perfect and still. Too still. Dr. Morrison came to examine me last week. He explained in terms he thought comforting that the weakness was in my body, a defect of the womb he called it, as if naming it made it more bearable. He says I will likely never carry a child to term, that my body simply is not built for it. But I know the truth, Ethan. The truth no doctor will speak because they are being kind. I killed her with my fear, with my inadequacy. You married a woman you thought was whole, and instead you got me. Broken, barren, unable to give you the family you deserved. Do you remember the day we chose the name Sarah? We were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and you had your hand on my belly, feeling her kick. You said Sarah was strong. Biblical, a good name for a frontier daughter. I loved you so much in that moment. Loved you and feared you in equal measure because I knew I could never be strong enough for you. After she died, after Dr. Harrison took away that tiny perfect body, I saw the way you looked at me. Not with blame, God help you, you were too good for that, but with such profound sadness, such loss. And I knew I'd failed you in the most fundamental way a wife can fail her husband. You tried to comfort me, said we were young, that we had time, that we'd try again. But how could I tell you what Dr. Morrison later confirmed? How could I look you in the eye and say there would be no trying again, no other children, no redemption for my broken body? I left because I love you, Ethan. Does that make sense? I left to save you from a lifetime chained to a woman who could never give you what you wanted. Mother says you'll find someone else in time, someone worthy of the life you're building. I pray with every breath that she's right. If you're happy, if you've forgotten me and moved on, then my leaving will have been worth it. That's what I tell myself on the nights I can't sleep. That somewhere in Montana you're living the life you deserve with someone who can actually be the wife you need. I'm sorry I wasn't her. I'm sorry I never will be. Your unworthy wife. Grace Ethan finished reading and found his vision blurred. Tears, the first he'd shed in 3 years, tracked silently down his weathered face. He wiped at them with the back of his hand, angry at the display of weakness, angrier still at the words on the page before him. She'd thought she failed him. Grace, who'd been sunshine and laughter in his life, who'd made the endless work of building this ranch feel worthwhile, who'd held him through nightmares about the war and never asked for more than he could give. She'd left believing she wasn't enough, and he'd let her believe it. Had been so caught up in his own grief and confusion that he'd never found the words to tell her the truth. That losing their daughter had been agony, yes, but losing her would be infinitely worse. That he'd never blamed her, had only blamed himself for not knowing how to pull her back from the edge of whatever darkness she was drowning in. He'd been good with horses, with building things, with fixing broken fences and solving practical problems, but he'd been useless at fixing the break inside his wife. And rather than try harder, rather than force the issue, he'd given her space, had thrown himself into work and hoped that time would heal what he couldn't. Instead, she'd interpreted his helplessness as abandonment, his silence as condemnation, and she'd left to save him from herself. Ethan reached for the second letter with hands that no longer shook, just felt numb. This one was dated August 1872, and the handwriting was shakier. Dearest Ethan, the consumption started last month, though I didn't recognize it at first. Just a cough that wouldn't go away. Mother insisted I see Dr. Morrison again. He listened to my lungs with that cold metal tube of his and got very quiet. Then he told Father I should prepare my affairs. I'm not afraid of dying. That probably sounds strange, but it's true. I'm more afraid of what dying means, that I wasted the time I had, that I ran from the one thing that might have given my life meaning. Sometimes I imagine writing to you properly, posting a letter and waiting for your response. But what would I say? Dear Ethan, I'm dying slowly in my childhood bedroom, coughing up blood and regret in equal measure. Please forgive me for being a coward. Claire thinks I'm being dramatic. She says I should go back to you, that you'd want to know. But she doesn't understand. How can I return as a dying woman? How can I burden you with watching me waste away? You've already lost one person you loved. I won't make you suffer through that again. Mother mentioned last week that Victoria Aldridge has been asking after you, the widow who owns the general store in Willow Creek. Mother seems to think you might court her. I hope you do, Ethan. I hope you find someone healthy and whole who can give you everything I couldn't. That's not self-pity, I promise. It's genuine. You deserve happiness. You deserve children and a full life. You deserve someone who doesn't break at the first real test. I loved you. I still do. But love isn't always enough. Grace. He read 6 more letters that night, watching the progression of Grace's illness through deteriorating handwriting and increasingly abbreviated thoughts. She wrote about her parents' well-meaning suffocation, about Claire's angry incomprehension, about San Francisco society treating her like a tragic figure, about the TB sanatorium where she'd spent her final months coughing and dreaming of Montana skies. In the 10th letter, dated just 2 months before her death, she'd written something that made Ethan's breath catch. There's a girl here at the sanatorium, barely 17, dying from the same disease as me. Yesterday she asked me what the most important thing I'd learned in life was. I told her that protecting people from yourself is the cruelest kind of love, that if I could do it over, I'd have stayed and fought through the hard times. I'd have trusted that love was stronger than my fear. She died this morning. I keep thinking about what I told her. Keep wondering if I believed my own words or if I was just trying to comfort a dying girl. If you ever read these, Ethan, please know that leaving you was the worst thing I ever did. Worse than losing Sarah. Worse than being sick. Because I chose it. I chose fear over faith. If there's any mercy in this world, you've moved on. You've found peace. You've stopped wearing that wedding ring and let yourself love again. But if some part of you still hurts, still wonders, then please hear this. None of it was your fault. You were everything I needed. I was just too broken to accept it. The eastern sky was starting to pale with approaching dawn when Ethan finished the last letter. He sat on his bed surrounded by pages covered in Grace's handwriting, feeling like he'd been taken apart and reassembled slightly wrong. Everything he'd believed about her, leaving every assumption he'd built his grief upon, had been inverted. She hadn't left because he'd failed her. She'd left because she thought she'd failed him. Both of them had been so busy trying to protect the other from pain that they'd created a chasm neither could cross. And in the end, that mutual silence had killed whatever chance they'd had of healing together. The tears came again, harder this time. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to tear themselves from somewhere behind his ribs. Ethan Holloway, who prided himself on stoic strength, who'd taught himself to endure anything without complaint, broke completely. He doubled over, pressing his face into his hands, and let 3 years of suppressed grief finally have its due. He cried for Grace, for the life they'd planned and lost, for their daughter Sarah, who'd never drawn breath, for his own failures of communication and courage, for the waste of it all, the stupid, senseless waste of two people who'd loved each other, destroying themselves, trying to spare the other pain. When the storm finally passed, leaving him hollow and exhausted, dawn light was streaming through the window. Ethan could hear movement in the house, the creak of floorboards in the main room. Claire likely awake and wondering what had become of her hostile host. He stood on shaking legs, splashed water from the basin on his face, and regarded himself in the cracked mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. But something in his expression had changed. Some tightness around his mouth had eased. For 3 years he'd carried guilt like a stone in his chest. Now, having read Grace's words, having understood her reasoning, he felt that weight shift. Not disappear, but transform into something different. Grief, yes, but clean grief. Not the infected wound of self-blame, but the honest sorrow of loss. He gathered the letters carefully, retied them with the blue ribbon, and carried them to the kitchen. Claire was already there, standing by the window with a cup of coffee. She turned when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her own expression soften. "You read them," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded, his voice still rough from crying. "All of them." "Then you know. She never stopped loving you." "No." He set the letters on the table with reverent care. "She didn't." They stood in the morning light, two people connected by a ghost, and for the first time since Claire's arrival, the hostility between them faded. In its place was something tentative but real, shared understanding of what had been lost, and perhaps the first fragile possibility of moving forward. Outside, Tommy's voice called out about the horses needing feed. The day was starting as days always did on a working ranch, regardless of personal revelation or emotional upheaval. But something fundamental had shifted. The truth, painful as it was, had cracked open the shell Ethan had built around himself. And standing there with Grace's sister, with Grace's letters between them, he felt the first stirrings of something he'd thought dead forever, the possibility that life might continue, that healing might be possible, that love, however complicated and costly, might still have room to grow in the ruins of what had been. The morning sun found Claire Bennett standing at the kitchen window watching Ethan Holloway work in the corral with the boy Tommy. She'd slept poorly in the narrow bed of what should have been a nursery, haunted by the sounds that had come from Ethan's room during the night. The muffled sobs of a grown man breaking apart. The kind of grief that couldn't be contained or controlled, only endured. She'd brought those letters expecting vindication, had carried them across half a continent, believing they would prove what her parents had insisted, that Ethan Holloway had failed her sister through coldness and neglect. Instead, Grace's words had revealed a more complex truth. A tragedy of mutual protection, of two people loving each other enough to destroy themselves, trying to spare the other pain. The coffee in her cup had gone cold, but Claire kept sipping it anyway. Through the window, she could see Ethan demonstrating something to Tommy, his large hands gentle on the boy's shoulders as he adjusted his stance. Whatever he was teaching the boy absorbed it with the intensity of someone starving for guidance. An orphan and a widower, she thought. Two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate losses. The door opened behind her. Ethan entered with the morning chill clinging to his clothes, bringing the scent of hay and horse sweat. His eyes were still red-rimmed from his night of reading, his face showing the exhaustion of someone who'd wrestled demons until dawn. But there was something different in the set of his shoulders, some burden partially lifted. "You should eat something," Claire said, breaking the silence. "There's bacon left from what I found in your larder." "You cooked?" Surprise flickered across his weathered features. "I'm not helpless, Mr. Holloway. I may have been raised in San Francisco society, but I know my way around a kitchen." She gestured to the plate she'd set aside. "Sit. You look like you might fall over." For a moment she thought he might refuse out of sheer stubbornness. Then his stomach growled audibly, and something that might have been embarrassment touched his face. He sat and ate with the mechanical efficiency of a man who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure. "The letters," Claire began carefully. "Did they help, or did I make things worse by coming here?" Ethan chewed slowly, considering his answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the roughness of someone who'd spent the night crying. "Both. Neither. I don't know yet." He set down his fork. "Your sister thought she was protecting me. I thought I was giving her space to heal. We were both fools." "You loved each other. That's not foolish. Isn't it?" His eyes met hers, and Claire saw depths of pain she hadn't expected. "We loved each other so much we couldn't talk to each other, couldn't trust each other with our real feelings. What good is love that can't survive honesty?" Before Claire could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. Through the window they could see an approaching carriage fancy enough to stand out against the rough frontier landscape, black lacquered wood with brass fittings pulled by a matched pair of grays that spoke of money and status. Ethan's jaw tightened. Victoria Aldridge. Damn! "Who?" "Widow who owns half of Willow Creek. Been trying to get me to court her for 2 years. He stood squaring his shoulders like a man preparing for battle. "This won't be pleasant." The carriage pulled to a stop in the yard, and a woman descended with practiced grace. She was perhaps 36, Claire judged, dressed in a traveling suit of deep burgundy that probably cost more than most frontier families earned in a year. Beautiful in a carefully maintained way, with dark hair styled in the latest fashion and gloved hands that had never seen hard labor. Victoria Aldridge's eyes went immediately to the house, then widened slightly when she spotted Claire standing in the doorway beside Ethan. Something calculating flickered across her face before she schooled it into a pleasant smile. "Ethan, I heard about the trouble with your south fence. Brought you some supplies." She gestured to a basket in the carriage, but her attention remained fixed on Claire. "I didn't realize you had company." "Victoria, this is Claire Bennett." Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. "Grace's sister. She's visiting from San Francisco." The change in Victoria's expression was subtle but unmistakable. Shock quickly masked. Assessment. And beneath it all, something that looked remarkably like jealousy. "Bennett, from San Francisco." Victoria's tone carried the weight of social judgment. "How unexpected! And you're staying here at the ranch?" Claire lifted her chin, recognizing the game being played. "I am. Unchaperoned. My, how very modern." The words were silk wrapped around steel. "I'm sure the good people of Willow Creek will find that fascinating." The threat was clear. In 1875, Montana, an unmarried woman staying alone with an unmarried man was a scandal that could destroy both their reputations. Victoria Aldridge, as one of the town's most prominent citizens, had the social power to make that scandal very real and very costly. Ethan stepped forward, his body language protective, in a way Claire suspected he didn't even realize. "Miss Bennett is family. She came to deliver something of Grace's. It's perfectly proper." "Of course." Victoria's smile never wavered. "I meant no offense. Simply noting how things might appear to others less understanding than myself." The tension hung thick in the morning air. Tommy had emerged from the barn and stood watching the adults with the wariness of a child who'd learned to read dangerous undercurrents. Claire found herself studying Victoria Aldridge with new attention, seeing not just a rival, but a woman who'd clearly been waiting for Ethan to finish grieving so she could position herself as his next wife. "You said something about fence trouble," Ethan redirected, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of conversation. Victoria's expression shifted to one of concern. "Jake mentioned it at the general store yesterday. Said someone cut your wire, ran off some cattle. I came to see if you needed anything, and to discuss something else, something important." She glanced meaningfully at Claire, clearly wanting privacy. Ethan caught the look and hesitated. Claire made the decision for him. "I should check on the horses. Make sure Tommy hasn't gotten himself into trouble." She moved past them both, catching Victoria's subtle smile of triumph. From the barn, Claire found she could hear their conversation through the open window. She told herself she wasn't eavesdropping, just happened to be within earshot. The rationalization felt thin, even to her own mind. "Ethan, I'll be direct," Victoria's voice carried clearly. "I've heard things about Harrison Blackwood making moves on your land. His lawyer filed a claim last week with the county recorder. Says he has documents proving prior ownership dated before your homestead filing." Claire heard Ethan's sharp intake of breath. "That's impossible. I filed properly in 1869, right after my discharge. This land was unclaimed." "I know you did. But Blackwood has Judge Crawley in his pocket. If this goes to court, you'll need lawyers. Good ones. They're expensive, Ethan. Very expensive." A pause. Then Victoria continued, her voice dropping to something more intimate. "Marry me. Combine our properties. I have the money to fight Blackwood. Together, we'd have the political influence to counter his connections. You'd keep your land. Build the life you've worked for." Claire's hands had stilled on the bridle she'd been adjusting. She told herself the sick feeling in her stomach was concern for the legal threat, not the marriage proposal. The lie felt transparent. Ethan's response came slowly, weighted with consideration. "Victoria, that's generous. Any man would be fortunate to have you. You're successful, respected, but I can't marry for convenience. Wouldn't be fair to either of us." "Is it because of her?" Victoria's tone sharpened. "Grace's sister. She shows up after 3 years and suddenly you're turning down solutions to save your ranch? It's not about Claire. It's about not building a marriage on legal necessity." Ethan's voice remained steady. "I made that mistake once before. Grace and I married young, thought love was enough. We were wrong, but at least we had love. I won't enter into something with even less foundation." "Pride is expensive, Ethan Holloway. When you lose this place to Blackwood's lawyers, remember I offered you a way out." The sound of Victoria's carriage departing pulled Claire from the barn. She found Ethan standing in the yard watching the dust settle in the widow's wake. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. "You heard that?" Not a question. Claire considered lying, then rejected it. "Yes." "And what do you think, that I'm a fool for refusing?" "I think you're a man who won't compromise his principles for convenience." She moved closer, studying his profile in the morning light. "But I also think you might be cutting off your nose to spite your face. If this Blackwood truly has a legal claim—" "He doesn't." Ethan's jaw set stubbornly. "I know I filed properly. Whatever documents he has are false. Can you prove it?" Before he could answer, another sound drew their attention. Hoofbeats again, but faster this time. More urgent. A single rider coming hard from the direction of town. Claire recognized the figure as he drew closer, a man in his late 50s wearing a tin star face weathered by decades of frontier life. Ethan's posture changed, going rigid. "That's Sheriff Thornton. He doesn't ride out here unless it's serious." The sheriff pulled his horse to a stop, the animal lathered and breathing hard. Wade Thornton dismounted with the careful movements of a man whose body had absorbed too many falls and fights. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took in both Ethan and Claire before settling on his old friend. "Ethan, got papers for you, from Judge Crawley's office." He pulled a folded document from his jacket, and Claire could see the official seals, even from a distance. "Blackwood's filed formal claim on your land. Says he's got a deed from 1868 issued by the territorial governor before your homestead filing. Ethan took the papers with hands that had gone white-knuckled. Claire watched his face as he read, saw the blood drain from his weathered features. Whatever was written there, it was worse than he'd expected. "This deed looks authentic," Ethan said finally, his voice hollow. "Seal's right. Signatures match what I've seen on other territorial documents." Sheriff Thornton shifted uncomfortably. "I know you filed proper, Ethan. Was at the land office with you, remember, stood witness to your claim. But the law says prior deed takes precedence over homestead filing. If Blackwood's paperwork predates yours, then I lose everything." Ethan finished the sentence with brutal honesty. "The house I built, the herd I've raised, everything. Not if you can prove his deed is fraudulent." The sheriff's tone suggested he believed it was, but proving it would be another matter entirely. "Hearing set for 3 weeks from now, October 15th. You'll need to show up with evidence that your claim is legitimate and his isn't." Claire found herself stepping forward before conscious thought caught up with action. "Sheriff, what exactly would constitute sufficient evidence?" Thornton's gaze shifted to her, assessing. "You'd be the sister from San Francisco. Heard you were visiting." "I am. And I'm asking what Mr. Holloway needs to prove his case." The sheriff's expression suggested approval of her directness. "Original land claim documents, proof of filing with the Territorial Land Office in Helena, witness testimony of continuous residence, records of improvements to the property, basically everything that shows he's been living here and working this land since 1869. And where would the land office records be kept? Helena. 3 days hard ride north through some rough territory." The sheriff looked at Ethan. "But you can't leave your property undefended. Not with Blackwood circling. He'd use the opportunity to cause more damage, maybe move in his own people to establish occupancy." Claire's mind was already working through logistics, pulling on the organizational skills she'd honed teaching school and managing her own affairs in San Francisco. "Then someone else needs to go to Helena, someone who can navigate bureaucracy and examine legal documents." Both men turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not." Ethan's response was immediate and emphatic. 3 days on horseback through territory you don't know with Blackwood's men likely watching the roads? It's too dangerous. Do you have a better suggestion?" Claire met his glare without flinching. "You need to stay and protect this place. The sheriff has his own duties. Who else is there?" "Jake could go, my ranch hand. He knows the territory." "Can Jake read legal documents, spot discrepancies in filing dates and registration numbers?" She pressed her advantage, seeing the hesitation in Ethan's face. "I was a teacher, Mr. Holloway. I know how to research, how to organize information, how to find what I'm looking for in archives. How many ranch hands can say the same?" Sheriff Thornton made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "She's got a point, Ethan. Girl's got spine, I'll give her that." "Not alone," Ethan said finally. "I'll send Jake with her. He can handle the riding and camping, keep watch while she's examining records. But Claire, if you're serious about this—" "I am." Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that moment, something Claire couldn't quite name. Understanding, perhaps, or the first stirrings of trust earned rather than assumed. "Then we prepare today, leave at first light tomorrow." Ethan turned to the sheriff. "Wade, I'll need you to keep an eye on the property while I'm here alone. Blackwood makes a move, I want the law as witness." "Can do." Thornton remounted with a grunt. "And Ethan, for what it's worth, I believe you. Always have. Blackwood's the kind of man who sees what he wants and figures the law's just a tool to take it. We'll prove his papers are forgeries." After the sheriff left, Ethan spent the afternoon teaching Claire to shoot. They stood in the open space behind the barn, where spent bullets would bury themselves in the hillside rather than endanger livestock. He'd given her his spare revolver, a Remington .44 that felt heavy and dangerous in her hands. "You know anything about firearms?" His tone was purely instructional, now focused on the practical matter of keeping her alive. "My father taught me basic pistol work. Said a woman should know how to protect herself." Claire examined the weapon with more familiarity than Ethan had expected. But it's been years. Then we review everything from the beginning. He moved behind her, his hands covering hers on the grip. Feel the weight. This isn't like those little pocket pistols society ladies carry. This will kill a man if you place your shot right. Claire found herself acutely aware of his proximity, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the way his calloused fingers adjusted her grip with surprising gentleness, the scent of him leather and honest sweat, and something uniquely masculine. Sight picture, he continued, seemingly unaffected. Line up the front post with the rear notch. Don't aim for center mass on a man. That's what soldiers are taught, and you're not a soldier. Aim for the largest part you can hit. Might be his shoulder, might be his leg. Goal is to stop the threat, not necessarily kill it. And if I have to kill, her voice came out steadier than she felt. Ethan's hands tightened briefly on hers. Then you aim for the chest, and you don't hesitate. Out here, Claire, hesitation gets you dead. If you draw this weapon, you better be prepared to use it. Understand? I understand. He stepped back, and Claire immediately felt the loss of his presence like a physical chill. Show me. She raised the revolver sighted on the target. Ethan had set up a rotting fence post maybe 20 yards distant and squeezed the trigger. The recoil surprised her despite his warnings, the weapon bucking in her hands and the report loud enough to make her ears ring. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt 3 feet to the left of the post. Again. Ethan's voice was patient. You're anticipating the recoil. Let it surprise you. Smooth press, don't jerk. They spent the next hour drilling until Claire's arms ached and her ears rang despite the cotton Ethan had given her to stuff in them. By the end, she was hitting the post 4 times out of 6. Not expert marksmanship, but competent enough that Ethan nodded approval. That'll do. You won't win any shooting competitions, but you can defend yourself if needed. He took the revolver, reloaded it with practiced efficiency, and handed it back. Keep this on you during the trip. Keep it loaded. And Claire. She looked up, meeting his eyes in the fading afternoon light. If Blackwood's men try to stop you, if they try to take those documents, you find you shoot first and feel guilty about it later. Your conscience can recover from killing in self-defense. You can't recover from being dead. The words should have been shocking, should have appalled her refined sensibilities. Instead, Claire found herself nodding understanding on a level deeper than simple agreement that Ethan Holloway was teaching her the brutal calculus of frontier survival. That evening she helped prepare for the journey while Ethan and Jake loaded saddlebags with supplies. Hardtack and jerky coffee and a small pot to brew it in. Bedrolls and matches. A spare shirt for each of them. Everything selected for utility over comfort. Tommy watched the preparations with poorly concealed worry. "Mr. Ethan, you sure about this, Miss Claire, going all the way to Helena?" "No." Ethan's honesty made Claire pause in her packing. "But I don't have a better option. And despite what you might think, watching her today, Miss Bennett, is tougher than she looks." The boy turned to Claire with an intensity that seemed wrong for his age. "You'll be careful, and you'll come back." Something in his tone suggested he'd heard that promise before from people who hadn't kept it. Claire knelt so she was eye level with him, seeing past the dirt-smudged face to the scared child beneath. "I'll be careful, and I will come back. You have my word." Tommy nodded, then impulsively hugged her. Claire found herself returning the embrace, surprised by the fierce protectiveness that rose in her chest. This boy who'd lost everything, who'd found a home with a man barely keeping his own life together. They were all of them broken pieces trying to fit into something that resembled family. Night fell with the suddenness common to autumn in Montana. After Tommy had been sent to bed in the bunkhouse, Claire and Ethan sat on the porch in the kind of companionable silence that suggested growing comfort with each other's presence. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by city lights or pollution. "Grace loved these nights," Ethan said quietly. "Used to drag me out here to watch for falling stars. Said each one was a soul finding its way to heaven." Claire felt her throat tighten. She wrote about that in one of her letters to me. Said the sky here made her feel small in the best possible way. Made her problems seem smaller too. Did it work? "I don't think so. Not in the end. She turned to look at his profile, shadowed and strong in the starlight. "Ethan, can I ask you something about after she left?" "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Did you look for her?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, for 3 days, rode to every neighboring ranch, every town within 50 miles. Asked everyone if they'd seen her. On the 4th day, your father's telegram arrived. Said she was with them in San Francisco, that she wouldn't see me, that coming after her would only make things worse. And you believed him. Didn't have much choice. I had no legal right to force her to come back. Marriage or not, a man can't kidnap his own wife if she's made it clear she wants to leave. His voice held old bitterness. So I came home, worked this land, tried to build something she might be proud of if she ever came back. Except she never did. Claire reached out without thinking, her hand finding his in the darkness. She wanted to. The letters I didn't bring, the ones she wrote to me, she talked about it constantly. How much she missed this place. How much she missed you. But by the time she was ready to face her fear, the consumption had taken too much. She was dying, and she didn't want you to watch. Ethan's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. I would have watched, would have held her through it. That's what marriage means, isn't it? The worst part of better or worse. I think she knew that. I think that's why she stayed away. Because she'd already put you through one death with the baby. She couldn't bear to put you through another. They sat like that for a long moment, hands linked, two people connected by a ghost, and by something neither of them quite dared to name yet. Then Ethan withdrew his hand, clearing his throat roughly. "You should get some rest. Dawn comes early, and Jake's a hard rider. He won't slow down for anyone." Claire stood, but found herself hesitating at the door. "Ethan, thank you for trusting me with this." "Don't thank me yet. If you find nothing in Helena, if Blackwood's papers stand up to scrutiny, this place is lost. You'll have made that trip for nothing. Then I better find something." She smiled, surprising herself. "I can be very stubborn when properly motivated." "I'm starting to see that." His tone carried something that might have been approval or might have been something warmer. "Good night, Claire." "Good night." She lay awake for hours in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Tommy's soft snoring from the bunkhouse, the cattle's distant lowing, the creak of boards as Ethan moved through his own evening routine, and beneath it all the whisper of wind through grass, the vast silence of Montana that Grace had loved so much. Somewhere in that darkness, Claire realized something that should have terrified her. She didn't want to leave this place, didn't want to return to San Francisco and the life she'd left behind. Teaching school to children of wealthy families who saw her as little more than a servant with pretensions. Living in her parents' house where every dinner conversation was a minefield of judgment and expectation. Being paraded before suitable bachelors like livestock at auction. Here, for the first time in her adult life, she felt useful, necessary. Not because of her family connections or her proper manners, but because of her actual skills and determination. Ethan Holloway needed help, and she could provide it. That simple fact carried more weight than all the social approval she'd ever craved. Dawn found them mounted and ready, Jake's weathered face impassive as he checked the saddle cinches one final time. Ethan stood in the yard with Tommy at his side, both of them watching Claire with expressions she couldn't quite read. "Stay on the main trails until you're past the territorial boundary," Ethan said, his tone all business. "Jake knows the safe camping spots. Don't push the horses too hard the first day. You'll need their strength for day 3 when the terrain gets rough." "We'll be fine." Claire adjusted her borrowed hat, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the Remington on her hip. 3 days there, 2 days to search records, 3 days back. We'll be home by October 7th at the latest." "Home." Ethan repeated the word like he was testing its shape. Then he stepped forward, catching her horse's bridle. "Claire, be careful. Blackwood's men might be watching the roads. If they try anything, I'll shoot first and feel guilty later." She finished his earlier instruction with a small smile. "You taught me well, Mr. Holloway." Something flickered in his expression. "When you get back, I think you better start calling me Ethan. We've moved past formality." Then you better start calling me Claire instead of Miss Bennett. Fair enough? He released the bridle, stepped back. Ride safe, both of you. Jake nodded acknowledgement and turned his mount north. Claire followed, resisting the urge to look back. She could feel Ethan's eyes on her until the trail curved into the pines and the ranch disappeared from view. The first day's ride was everything Jake had warned it would be: long, uncomfortable, and monotonous. They stopped only to rest the horses and to choke down cold meals while standing. Jake proved to be a man of few words, answering Claire's attempts at conversation with grunts and single-syllable responses. By the second day, she'd given up trying and settled into her own thoughts. The Montana landscape opened up around them in all its harsh beauty. Rolling hills gave way to steeper terrain as they climbed into the highlands. Pines thick enough to block the sun, meadows where elk grazed in the early morning mist, streams running cold and clear, the water so pure it hurt to drink. Claire found herself understanding what had drawn Grace to this place. There was a grandeur here, a sense of space and possibility that made San Francisco's cramped streets feel suffocating by comparison. This was a land that demanded strength but rewarded those who could meet its challenges. Grace had seen that, had loved it, and ultimately had felt herself unworthy of it. On the evening of the second day, as they made camp by a nameless creek, Jake finally spoke more than 3 words together. "Boss likes you." Claire looked up from the fire she was trying to coax to life. "What?" "Mr. Ethan, he likes you. Can see it in how he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching." Jake arranged stones around the fire pit with practiced efficiency. "Haven't seen him look at anyone that way since Miss Grace left. Thought maybe you should know." Heat that had nothing to do with the struggling flames rose in Claire's cheeks. "That's inappropriate. I'm his wife's sister." His dead wife's sister. Jake's tone was matter-of-fact, without judgment. "And out here we don't hold much with what's appropriate. We hold with what works. Man needs a woman who won't break under pressure. You seem like you might be that woman." Before Claire could formulate a response, hoofbeats echoed through the pines, multiple riders approaching fast. Jake's hand went to the rifle across his saddle, his weathered face going hard. "Stay behind me," he ordered, and this time Claire didn't argue. 3 men emerged from the tree line, their horses lathered and breathing hard. Cowboys by their dress, but there was something wrong about them, something too rough, too deliberately threatening. The leader, a man perhaps 35 with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, reined in his mount and studied them with calculating eyes. "Evening, folks. Pretty far from the nearest ranch to be camping out here." Jake's rifle remained pointed casually downward, but his finger was inside the trigger guard. "Passing through to Helena. No trouble intended." "Helena." The scarred man smiled without warmth. "Wouldn't happen to be traveling on behalf of Ethan Holloway, would you?" The question confirmed Claire's worst suspicions. These were Blackwood's men, and they'd been watching the ranch, known the moment she and Jake left, had followed them for 2 days, waiting for the right moment to make their move. "Don't know anyone by that name," Jake lied smoothly. "That's funny, because I could swear I've seen you working at Holloway's spread, and the lady there, she looks an awful lot like a woman who showed up at his ranch a few days back." The man's hand drifted toward his own weapon. "Mr. Blackwood asked us to deliver a message. Whatever documents you're planning to dig up in Helena, they won't make any difference. Judge Crawley's already decided the case. Smart thing would be to turn around, save yourself the trouble." "We'll take our chances." Claire's voice rang out clear despite the fear making her pulse race. The scarred man's attention shifted to her, and something predatory entered his expression. "Strong words from a city girl, but words don't count for much out here, miss. Actions do. And the action I'm recommending is you hand over any papers you might find, spare yourself and your friend here some unfortunate accidents." Jake's rifle came up in one smooth motion. "Time for you boys to ride on." For a moment violence hung balanced on a knife's edge. Then the scarred man laughed, though his eyes remained cold. "We're going, but we'll be seeing you again, Miss Bennett. Count on it." They wheeled their horses and disappeared back into the pines, leaving Claire and Jake alone with the crackling fire and the knowledge that the return journey would be far more dangerous than the trip out. Jake methodically checked and loaded every weapon they carried. "We'll ride through the night. Put distance between us and them. Won't stop until we reach Helena." "Won't the horses?" "Horses can rest in Helena. Us being alive is more important than us being comfortable." They rode through darkness, Jake navigating by starlight and instinct, while Claire clung to her saddle and tried not to think about what could be lurking in the shadows beyond their small circle of light. By the time dawn broke pale and cold over the mountains, they'd covered what should have been a day's travel. Helena emerged from the morning mist like a promise. Larger than Willow Creek, more established, with brick buildings and paved streets and the bustle of commerce. The territorial capital where laws were made and land claims were filed, and somewhere in dusty archives lay the proof Ethan needed. Claire dismounted on shaking legs, every muscle screaming protest. Jake looked little better, his face gray with exhaustion beneath its weathered tan. "You find what you need," he said. "I'll get the horses stabled and catch a few hours' sleep. Meet back at the hotel by sunset." The land office occupied a nondescript building on 4th Street, its interior musty with the smell of old paper and bureaucratic indifference. A clerk, perhaps 50 and profoundly bored, looked up from his newspaper as Claire entered. "Help you. I need to access land claim records. Willow Creek area filed in 1869. Name of Ethan Holloway." The clerk sighed like she'd asked him to move mountains. "Search fee is 20 cents. Archives are in the back. You break anything, you buy it." Claire paid and was directed to a storage room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. Each book contained hundreds of filed claims organized by date and district. She rolled up her sleeves and began to work pulling volumes and cross-referencing entries with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years teaching students to research properly. Hours passed. Dust motes danced in the thin light from a high window. Her eyes burned from squinting at cramped handwriting and faded ink. But finally there it was, Ethan Holloway's claim, filed March 1869, properly witnessed and notarized. 160 acres in the Willow Creek Valley Township and range clearly specified. Then she found Blackwood's claim. Same parcel, same legal description, but dated September 1868, 6 months before Ethan's filing. If authentic, it would invalidate everything Ethan had built. Claire pulled the volume closer, studying the entry with intense focus. Something about it nagged at her, some detail that didn't quite fit. The ink was slightly different in tone from surrounding entries. The paper, when she held it up to the light, showed a watermark she didn't recognize. She called the clerk over. "This watermark, do you know what mill it's from?" The clerk squinted at the page, pulled spectacles from his vest pocket, squinted again. "Riverside Mill out of Portland. Started operations in 1870. Claire's heart began to pound. "You're certain?" "Been filing land claims for 15 years, miss. I know every paper supplier the office uses. That's Riverside stock. Wasn't available until 70, maybe late 69 at earliest. But this entry is dated 1868. Then someone entered it wrong, or—" The clerk's eyes widened as he understood the implications. "Or it's a forgery. A backdated forgery. I need an official statement from this office. Something that certifies when Mr. Blackwood's claim was actually filed and confirmation that the paper stock used wasn't available on the supposed date of filing." The clerk hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood is a powerful man, miss. He has friends in high places. Friends who wouldn't appreciate their business partner being called a fraud." Claire pulled every ounce of steel her mother had ever tried to beat into her and channeled it into her spine. "And Mr. Holloway is a man who filed his claim honestly and built his home with his own hands. Now I'm asking you to do your job. Will you, or do I need to take this to the territorial governor?" The threat of involving higher authority apparently carried weight. The clerk's face shifted from hesitation to resignation. "I'll need an hour to prepare the documents. Official seal signed affidavit, the whole business." "I'll wait." By the time the sun touched the western mountains, Claire had what she needed. Ethan's original filing, certified copies of all relevant documents, and the clerk's sworn statement that Blackwood's claim had been entered on paper that couldn't have existed on its stated date. The evidence was damning conclusive and likely to make her a target on the ride home. Jake was waiting at the hotel looking more rested but no less concerned. "You find what you needed?" "I found proof that Harrison Blackwood is a liar and a fraud." Claire patted the leather document case she'd purchased. "Let's get back to Willow Creek before he realizes what we've got." The ride home began well enough. They made good time the first day, putting miles between themselves and Helena while watching constantly for pursuit. But on the second day, as they entered the mountain pass that would lead them back toward Willow Creek, 3 riders appeared on the trail ahead. The scarred man from before and 2 others Claire didn't recognize, all armed, all positioned to block any forward progress. Jake's hand went to his rifle, but he didn't pull it free. "Not yet." "We don't want trouble." "Then hand over the documents." The scarred man's voice was flat professional. "Do it and we let you ride on. Otherwise things get complicated." "Not happening." Claire surprised herself with the firmness of her own voice. "Miss Bennett, I'm trying to do this the easy way. Don't make me resort to the hard way." Jake made his decision. His rifle came up fast, and he fired in the same motion. The shot took the scarred man high in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Chaos erupted. Claire's horse reared as gunfire cracked through the afternoon air. She fought to control the animal while trying to remember everything Ethan had taught her. Draw smooth aim for center mass squeeze, don't jerk. Her first shot went wild. The second hit one of the other men in the thigh, and he went down screaming. Jake was already moving, spurring his horse forward through the gap created by the downed men. Claire followed, clinging to saddle and reins and the precious document case. More shots behind them, the whine of bullets passing too close. Then they were into the trees, weaving between pines, while hoofbeats thundered in pursuit. They rode like demons were chasing them because, in a sense, they were. Demons of greed and corruption, willing to kill for the prize Blackwood had set before them. Claire's world narrowed to the rhythm of her horse's gait, the burning in her lungs, the desperate need to keep moving. Jake went down first. His horse stepped wrong, stumbled, and both rider and mount crashed into the underbrush. Claire pulled up, torn between continuing and going back. The decision was made for her when Jake rolled to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his head, and waved her on. "Go, get those papers to Ethan, I'll slow them down." She went, hating herself for it, promising that she'd send help back. The sound of gunfire behind her confirmed that Jake was keeping his word, buying her time with his life. By the time she emerged from the pass 2 hours later, her horse was blown, and she was lost. The familiar landmarks she'd memorized on the journey out looked different in the failing light. Every shadow might hide pursuit. Every sound might be death approaching. Then, as full darkness fell, she saw lights in the distance. Willow Creek, or possibly one of the outlying ranches. She urged her exhausted horse toward civilization and safety, and the desperate hope that Ethan's ranch wasn't far beyond. The lights resolved into Willow Creek itself, the small frontier town mostly shuttered for the night. The sheriff's office showed a lamp burning, and Claire made for it like a drowning woman reaching for a rope. Sheriff Thornton looked up from his desk as she burst through the door, disheveled and dust-covered and clutching the document case like a lifeline. "Miss Bennett, what in God's name—" "Blackwood's men. Ambushed us in the pass. Jake's wounded, maybe dead. They were trying to take these." She thrust the case at him. "Everything Ethan needs is in there. Proof that Blackwood's claim is forged." The sheriff took the case, his weathered face going grim. "Blackwood's men attacked you. You certain?" The leader had a scar through his eyebrow. "I shot one of the others in the leg." "Sheriff, they weren't trying to scare us. They were trying to kill us." "That's attempted murder. Conspiracy to commit fraud." Thornton stood reaching for his hat. "I'll get a posse together, ride back for Jake. You need to get to Holloway's place. Tell him what happened. Tell him I'll have these documents filed with the federal marshal's office by morning. Blackwood just made the mistake of his life." Claire remounted her exhausted horse and pushed on toward the ranch. 8 miles had never seemed so far. Every shadow was a threat, every sound a potential ambush. But finally, blessedly, she saw the familiar outline of Ethan's house against the star-filled sky. Lights blazed in every window. As she rode closer, she could see damage. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Fence rails lay splintered on the ground. Signs of violence of men who'd come in the night to do harm. Ethan appeared on the porch, rifle in hands, Tommy beside him. For a moment they just stared at each other across the dusty yard. Then Ethan was moving, running to catch her as she nearly fell from the saddle. His arms closed around her, strong and steady and real. "Claire, God, I thought when I saw you coming alone, I thought, I'm safe. Jake isn't. They ambushed us. But I got the documents. I got the proof." She was babbling now, exhaustion and fear and relief all crashing over her at once. Ethan's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, pressing her face against his chest where she could hear the thundering of his heart. "You're safe," he repeated like he was trying to convince himself. "That's what matters. While I was gone, they came here too, didn't they?" Claire pulled back enough to gesture at the damage visible in the lamplight. "Blackwood's men." "Tried to." Ethan's jaw set in a hard line. "Tommy spotted them coming, raised the alarm. We fought them off. Killed 3, wounded 2 more. Sheriff took the survivors into custody this morning." "Tommy." Claire's heart clenched. "Is he?" "Boy's fine. Brave as they come. Stood his ground and fired the warning shots that saved us." Pride evident in every word. They stood like that for a long moment, arms around each other, both of them trembling with the aftershocks of violence and fear. Then Tommy's voice broke the spell. "Mr. Ethan, Miss Claire needs to come inside. She looks like she might fall over." Inside the house, Claire collapsed into a chair while Ethan heated water for coffee. Her hands were shaking too badly to hold a cup, so he pressed a measure of whiskey into them instead. She drank, coughed, felt the burn chase some of the coldness from her core. "Tell me everything," Ethan said quietly. "Start to finish." She did, leaving nothing out. The journey to Helena, the discovery of the forged documents, the ambush on the return. Jake's sacrifice to buy her escape. Every detail spilled out in a rush of words that felt like purging poison from a wound. When she finished, Ethan sat in silence for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "You could have been killed. For land. For documents. For me." "Yes." "Why? Why risk that?" Claire met his eyes, and in them she saw the question he was really asking, the question neither of them had been willing to voice yet. "Because Grace loved this place, because you and Tommy need this home, because—" She paused, gathered her courage. "Because somewhere between the gate and Helena, I stopped doing this for my sister's memory and started doing it for you." The admission hung between them, naked and vulnerable. Ethan's grip on her hands tightened. "Claire, I need to tell you something. While you were gone, I found another letter. One Grace had hidden in a book on the shelf. I'd been using that book to press wildflowers, and when I opened it, the letter fell out." He released her hands long enough to retrieve an envelope from his desk. The paper was yellowed, the creases deep from having been folded and refolded many times. "It's addressed to both of us, you and me, together." With hands that shook only slightly, Ethan unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "My beloved Ethan and dearest Claire, if you're reading this together, then my deepest hope has come true. You've found each other in my absence. You've discovered what I suspected during those last fevered days, that you were meant to walk the same path, even if I had to step off it for that to happen. Ethan, you need a woman who won't break under this hard land's pressure, someone with spine and steel beneath her silk. Claire has always been the stronger sister, though our parents could never see it. They wanted us both to be ornamental, but Claire insisted on being useful. Treasure that. Honor it. Claire, you need someone who sees your strength and doesn't fear it. Who values competence over compliance. Ethan loved me despite my weakness. He'll love you because of your strength. Let him. I release you both from any guilt or obligation to my memory. What you feel for each other doesn't diminish what Ethan and I shared. Love doesn't work that way. It multiplies, it transforms, it finds new shapes while honoring old ones. Build the life I couldn't. Raise the children I never bore. Fill this house with laughter instead of ghosts. And sometimes on clear nights, look up at the stars and remember that I'm at peace, that I want nothing more than your happiness. Take care of each other. You're both stronger than you know, but everyone needs someone to lean on when the weight gets too heavy. All my love, all my blessings, all my hope for your future together. Grace. Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the tick of the mantel clock and the distant sound of Tommy's breathing from the loft where he'd finally succumbed to exhaustion. Claire felt tears tracking down her face, but for once they weren't tears of grief. She knew, Claire whispered. She planned this. Or hoped for it. Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. Grace always was smarter than both of us combined. He stood, moved around the table, and knelt before Claire's chair. This close she could see every line the Montana sun had carved into his face, every gray hair that had come too early from grief and hard work. Could see past all of that to the man beneath. Good, honest, broken in ways that matched her own fractures. I love you, Claire Bennett, not because you remind me of your sister, not because she gave us permission, but because you rode 3 days into danger for me, because you stood your ground against armed men, because you came back when you could have kept riding to safety. He took her hands again. I love you because you're you, fierce and brave and stubborn enough to tell me when I'm being a fool. Claire felt her breath catch. Ethan, I know it's too soon. I know it's complicated. I know society will say all kinds of things about a man who loves his dead wife's sister, but I'm done caring what people think. I'm done letting fear make my decisions. If you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I'm asking you to stay. Help me fight for this land. Build something with me. Be my partner in every sense of the word. It wasn't quite a proposal. They both knew that. Too much stood between them, still legal battles to fight, reputations to consider, grief to fully process. But it was a declaration of intent, a promise of future possibilities. Claire leaned forward, framing his face with her hands, feeling the rough stubble of his beard against her palms. I love you too. I tried not to. Told myself it was wrong, inappropriate, a betrayal of Grace's memory. But your sister was right about everything else. Maybe she was right about this too. She kissed him then, tentative and questioning. Ethan responded with a careful intensity that made her heart race. His hands came up to tangle in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd exchanged with Kenneth Shaw during their ill-fated courtship. This was raw and real and tasted of coffee and hope and the promise of something neither of them had expected to find. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The legal fight, the town gossip, all of it. But whatever happens, we face it together. Agreed. Agreed. Outside, the Montana night continued its vast and indifferent sweep across the sky. Somewhere out there, Harrison Blackwood was learning that his plans had unraveled. Jake was hopefully receiving medical care. Sheriff Thornton was preparing to file federal charges. The world was in motion, consequences building like storm clouds. But in the warm kitchen of the ranch house Ethan had built with his own hands, two people who'd found each other through grief and grace held on to each other and believed for the first time in years that tomorrow might bring something better than mere survival. It might bring actual happiness, and that was worth fighting for. Part 3. The Legacy of Forgiveness. Morning came too early after a night of little sleep. Claire woke in the narrow bed of the spare room, every muscle protesting the previous day's brutal ride. For a moment she lay still, listening to the sounds of the ranch coming to life. Ethan's boots on the porch boards, Tommy's voice calling questions about the morning chores, the lowing of cattle and the whinny of horses demanding breakfast. She rose, dressed in the same dusty clothes from yesterday, and emerged to find Ethan already preparing coffee. He turned when she entered, and something passed between them. Not just memory of the kiss they'd shared, but acknowledgement of the words spoken. The future promised. The commitment made despite all the reasons they should have remained apart. "Any word on Jake?" Claire asked, accepting the cup he offered. "Sheriff sent a rider an hour ago. Jake's alive. Took a bad knock to the head and lost some blood, but Doc Harrison says he'll make it." Ethan's relief was palpable. Blackwood's men weren't so lucky. One dead, two wounded enough, they won't be causing trouble anytime soon. And Blackwood himself, still walking free, can't arrest a man just because his hired hands committed crimes, not unless you can prove he ordered it. Frustration colored Ethan's tone. "But the documents you brought back, those change everything. Sheriff's taking them to the federal marshal this morning. Judge Crawley won't be able to protect Blackwood from federal charges of fraud." Tommy burst through the door, his young face alight with excitement that seemed inappropriate given the previous day's violence. Then Claire realized this was normal for him. Violence, danger, uncertainty. The boy had learned to find joy in small victories because dwelling on losses would crush him. "Mr. Ethan, the horses are fed, and I checked all the fence lines like you taught me. No more damage from yesterday." Pride rang clear in his voice. "And I found something. Out by the south pasture." Ethan's attention sharpened. "Show me." They walked together, the three of them, across land that was fighting for. The autumn morning was crisp frost still clinging to shaded grass. In the distance, the mountains rose sharp against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Grace had loved this view, had spent hours sketching it, trying to capture something that couldn't be contained in pencil and paper. Tommy led them to a section of fence that had been cut 2 weeks prior. In the dirt beside the damaged wire, something glinted. Ethan knelt, brushed away dust, and lifted what looked like a distinctive knife. The handle was carved bone, the blade still sharp, and etched into the metal near the hilt was a set of initials, HB. Harrison Blackwood. Ethan turned the knife over in his hands, examining it with the careful attention of a man who understood evidence. Fancy piece, custom made, probably cost more than most men earn in a month. "Is it his?" Claire asked. "I've seen him wear it at town meetings. Likes to use it for cleaning his fingernails, showing off." Tommy's observation was delivered with the casual disdain only a 12-year-old could muster. He must have dropped it when they cut the fence. Or one of his men did, carrying it for him. Ethan stood pocketing the knife. "Either way, it's evidence. Physical proof tying Blackwood directly to the property damage. Sheriff will want to see this." They were walking back toward the house when another rider appeared on the horizon. This one, Claire didn't recognize, a man perhaps 30 years old, well dressed in the manner of city professionals, riding with the careful competence of someone who'd learned horsemanship but wasn't born to it. Ethan's hand went to his gun, then relaxed as recognition dawned. "That's Robert Bennett, your brother." Claire's heart stuttered. "Robert here." The rider drew closer, and Claire confirmed Ethan's identification. Her older brother, the lawyer who'd chosen progressive politics over their father's conservative business practices, who'd written her letters of support when she'd broken her engagement to Kenneth Shaw. Robert, who'd always been more ally than antagonist, even when disagreeing with her choices. He dismounted with a slight wince that suggested he'd pushed hard to reach them. His clothes were dusty from travel, his face showing the exhaustion of someone who'd ridden through the night. But his eyes, when they met Claire's, held nothing but concern. "Claire, thank God." He pulled her into a brief embrace. "Your telegram said you were staying to help with a legal matter. What the hell have you gotten yourself into? How much time do you have?" Claire tried for levity, but it fell flat. "This is Ethan Holloway, Grace's husband, and this is Tommy." Robert's gaze shifted to Ethan, assessing. Lawyers' eyes trained to read people in situations with brutal efficiency. Whatever he saw must have satisfied some internal criteria because he extended his hand. "Mr. Holloway, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Claire's telegram was brief but concerning enough that I caught the first train west." Ethan shook his grip firm. "Your sister's been invaluable, literally risked her life to save my land." "So I gathered." Robert's tone suggested he intended to hear the full story very soon. "But first, I need to know the legal situation. Claire mentioned fraud, forged documents, and a corrupt local judge." As your sister's attorney, and as someone who deals with land law, I'd like to offer my services." They moved inside, spreading the documents Claire had retrieved from Helena across the kitchen table. Robert examined them with professional focus, his trained eye catching details that would escape a layman's notice. He asked questions sharp and specific about dates and signatures and the chain of evidence. Ethan answered with a precision that spoke to his own intelligence, and Claire found herself seeing him through her brother's eyes, not just a frontier rancher, but a man of substance and capability. "This is solid," Robert said finally. "The watermark analysis is particularly damning. No judge, corrupt or otherwise, can ignore physical evidence that Blackwood's claim was backdated using paper that didn't exist when he claims to have filed." He looked up at Ethan. "But you need to understand what you're facing. Blackwood has money and political connections. Even with this evidence, he'll drag the case through appeals, tie you up in legal fees for years. Can you afford that kind of fight?" Ethan's jaw set in a familiar, stubborn line. "I'll find a way. This land is worth fighting for." "I don't doubt your determination. But legal battles aren't won with grit alone. They're won with money and patience, neither of which most homesteaders possess in abundance." Robert's tone wasn't unkind, just brutally realistic. "I'm willing to take your case, Mr. Holloway, pro bono, as a service to my sister and to the memory of your wife. But you still need resources for depositions, expert witnesses, the inevitable appeals process." Claire spoke before Ethan could the idea forming, even as she voiced it. What if it wasn't just Ethan's fight? What if he had a partner, someone with capital to invest in the ranch and the legal battle? Both men turned to stare at her. "I have money," she continued, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. "Inheritance from my grandmother. $3,000 that my parents can't touch. Enough to fund the legal fight and invest in expanding the ranch operations." "Claire, no." Ethan's response was immediate. "I won't take your inheritance." "You wouldn't be taking it. You'd be accepting a business partnership." She stood, moving to face him directly. "Equal investment, equal ownership, equal say in decisions. A formal contract, legally binding. Not charity, Mr. Holloway. Business." "A woman can't own property in Montana except through marriage or inheritance." Robert interjected, his tone thoughtful. "But a business partnership is different. If structured correctly, Claire could hold a legal stake in the ranch as a partner rather than an owner. The distinction matters under territorial law." Ethan shook his head, pride warring with practicality across his weathered features. "I built this place with my own hands. Asking a woman to risk her money to save it, it doesn't sit right." "Why?" Claire challenged. "Because I'm a woman, or because taking help feels like failure?" The question hit home. Ethan's face tightened, but he didn't look away. "Maybe both." Tommy, who'd been listening with the quiet intensity of someone learning adult lessons, spoke up. "Mr. Ethan, remember what you taught me about the Johnsons and the Millers, how they partnered up last year, pooled their resources, and now they're the biggest operation in the territory." "That's different. They were both men, both ranchers." "But you said the principle was the same," the boy pressed. "That smart people partner up instead of struggling alone. That there's no shame in accepting help from someone who believes in what you're building." Out of the mouths of children. Claire watched Ethan's expression shift as his own words came back to challenge his pride. Robert watched the exchange with barely concealed approval, his lawyer's mind clearly appreciating the strategy. "A 50-50 partnership," Ethan said slowly, testing the concept. "Equal stakes, equal authority. With one condition," Claire added, "that I stay, long-term, actually work the ranch alongside you, not just provide capital and disappear back to San Francisco. That would mean living here, permanently." Ethan's eyes searched hers. "Leaving your life in the city, your family, everything you know." "I have no life in the city worth keeping. My family—" She glanced at Robert, who nodded, understanding. "Most of my family has made clear their disapproval of my choices. And everything I know, all my education and skills, they're more useful here than in some San Francisco drawing room." "There's a problem with this arrangement," Robert said quietly. "A legal complication you're both dancing around. They turned to him. An unmarried woman living on a frontier ranch as co-owner alongside an unmarried man. Even with a formal partnership agreement, the optics are problematic. You'd face constant social censure, accusations of impropriety. In some territories, moral charges that could invalidate your partnership agreement and land claims both. Then what do you suggest? Ethan's tone had gone flat. Marriage. Robert said it simply without judgment. A legal union that provides social legitimacy to the business arrangement and protection under territorial law. Claire felt her cheeks warm. They'd kissed last night, confessed feelings, but speaking of marriage in the cold light of day with her brother as witness felt different, more real, more frightening. I wasn't planning to propose in front of an audience, Ethan said, but there was something in his voice that suggested he'd been thinking along similar lines. And I sure as hell wasn't planning to make it about business convenience. He turned to face Claire, fully taking both her hands in his. The gesture was achingly familiar from the night before, but this time carried different weight. Tommy watched with barely contained excitement. Robert maintained professional neutrality, but Claire caught the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Claire Bennett, I'm going to do this properly, even if the timing's all wrong and your brother's standing 3 feet away. Ethan took a breath. I love you. Not because you can save my ranch, though I'm grateful for the offer. Not because you remind me of Grace, though you carry some of her best qualities. I love you because you're brave and stubborn and smarter than me by half. Because you rode into danger to help someone you barely knew. Because when you commit to something, you commit completely. He released one of her hands to fish something from his pocket. A ring simple gold with a small sapphire that caught the morning light. This was my mother's. Grace never wanted it said it reminded her too much of other people's expectations. But I think it might suit you. If you'll have it. If you'll have me. Claire's throat felt tight. Are you asking me to marry you for business reasons or personal ones? Both. Neither. Hell, I don't know anymore. Frustration and hope mixed in his expression. I'm asking because I want to wake up next to you every morning. Because I want to build something lasting with you. Because the thought of you leaving tears me apart. The business partnership, the social respectability, those are bonuses. But I'd marry you tomorrow if you were penniless and we had to start over with nothing. That's good, Robert murmured, because our parents are likely to disown her for this. Robert. Claire shot her brother a look that should have scorched. I'm being realistic. You're proposing to marry your dead sister's husband. In their social circle, that's beyond scandalous. It's practically gothic. He held up a hand, forestalling her protest. I support your choice. I've seen enough in the past hour to know Ethan Holloway is a good man, but you need to go into this with eyes open about what it will cost you. Claire looked at the ring in Ethan's palm, then up at his face. Weathered, honest, showing every year of hard living and harder loss. Not a handsome man by society's standards, but strong, reliable, real in ways Kenneth Shaw had never been, in ways most of the men she'd known in San Francisco could never aspire to. My eyes are open. She met Ethan's gaze steadily. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll be your partner in business and in life. I'll help you fight for this land and build something we can be proud of. And if society doesn't approve, that's their problem, not ours. Ethan's face transformed relief and joy, chasing away the permanent lines of worry. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit like it had been waiting for her all along. Then he pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly and without regard for their audience. Tommy let out a whoop of pure delight. Robert cleared his throat, but Claire could hear the smile in his voice when he spoke. I suppose I should draw up the partnership papers and a prenuptial agreement, protect both your interests legally. Make it fair, Ethan said, not releasing Claire. True 50-50 split on everything. She's taking as much risk as I am. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Robert stayed setting up temporary residence in Willow Creek's modest hotel while he prepared the legal cases, criminal fraud charges against Blackwood, appeals of the land claim, and the partnership documentation that would govern Ethan and Claire's business arrangement. Sheriff Thornton arrested Harrison Blackwood on federal charges using both the forged documents and the recovered knife as evidence. The sight of the territory's wealthiest landowner being led away in chains caused considerable stir in Willow Creek's small society. Judge Crawley, faced with evidence of his own complicity, resigned his position and left Montana entirely. The federal marshal appointed a replacement who reviewed the case and ruled in Ethan's favor within a week. The legal vindication came swiftly once corruption was removed from the equation. But legal victory didn't translate to social acceptance. Word spread quickly about Claire Bennett's engagement to her dead sister's husband, and the reaction was predictably mixed. Older residents, particularly the women who'd known Grace, expressed shock and disapproval. Younger families, those who'd built their own lives on the frontier and understood the necessity of pragmatic choices, were more accepting. Victoria Aldridge proved surprisingly gracious in defeat. She visited the ranch one afternoon, ostensibly to deliver wedding gift of quality linen, but really to take Claire's measure one final time. "I won't pretend I'm not disappointed," Victoria said as they stood on the porch. "But I can see what Ethan sees in you. You have steel in your spine. Grace was lovely, but she was china that cracked under pressure. You're iron. This life needs iron." "That's quite the metaphor." "It's truth." Victoria adjusted her gloves with practiced elegance. "Treat him well, Miss Bennett, soon to be Mrs. Holloway. He's one of the good ones." "I know." The more difficult confrontation came when William and Margaret Bennett arrived from San Francisco, summoned by Robert's telegram about the impending wedding. Claire watched their carriage approach with a dread she tried to hide. Ethan stood beside her, solid and supportive, but this was her battle to fight. Her father emerged first, his face set in lines of rigid disapproval. 60 years of merchant success and social climbing had taught William Bennett to value reputation above all else, and his daughter was about to commit an act that would make them the subject of gossip for years. "Claire, I hope the telegram was a mistake." No greeting, no warmth, just disappointment delivered like a slap. "It's not a mistake, Father. I'm marrying Ethan Holloway. The ceremony is in 3 days, and I'd like you there, but I'll proceed with or without your approval." Margaret Bennett descended from the carriage with the careful movements of a woman who'd spent her life maintaining perfect posture. She looked older than Claire remembered, as if grief over Grace had aged her in ways mere time couldn't account for. "Your sister has been dead less than 3 years," Margaret's voice was ice, "and you're replacing her in her own husband's bed. Have you no shame?" "Grace is not being replaced." Claire kept her tone even, refusing to rise to the bait. "She can never be replaced, but she's gone, Mother, and the living have to keep living." "This is perverse, unnatural. Marrying your sister's widower is biblical," Robert interjected smoothly, stepping forward. "Levirate marriage. When a man's brother dies childless, the surviving brother is obligated to marry the widow. This is the reverse situation, but the principle holds. Grace and Ethan had no surviving children. Claire is fulfilling a duty to her sister's memory by ensuring Grace's husband isn't left alone." "Don't twist Scripture to justify scandal," William snapped. "I'm not justifying anything. They need no justification." Robert's tone hardened. "Claire is 28 years old, independently wealthy, and perfectly capable of making her own choices. You can accept those choices and maintain a relationship with your daughter, or you can cling to social propriety and lose her. Your decision." The ultimatum hung in the autumn air. Margaret's face worked through several emotions before settling on something that might have been resignation. She looked past Claire to where Ethan stood, studying him with a mother's evaluating eye. "Do you love my daughter, Mr. Holloway?" "Yes, ma'am, with everything I have." "And you'll treat her well, provide for her, protect her from the hardships of this rough life." "She doesn't need my protection. She's proven stronger than I gave her credit for." Ethan's honesty clearly wasn't what Margaret expected. "But yes, I'll treat her well. I'll work myself to the bone to give her a good life. And I'll honor Grace's memory while building our future. She deserves nothing less." Something in Margaret's rigid posture softened fractionally. "Grace wrote to me before she died, a letter I didn't understand at the time. She said she hoped you'd find happiness again, that you deserved a woman who could thrive in this wild place. Perhaps she knew her own limitations better than we did. It wasn't acceptance, but it was acknowledgement. Claire felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. Her father remained stony-faced, clearly unmoved, but her mother's softening was more than she'd dared hope for. "I won't give my blessing," William said finally, "but I won't disown you either. The business can weather this scandal, barely, but don't expect me to celebrate this union. I don't expect celebration. I'd simply like you there." Claire held out a hand, waiting. "I'm still your daughter, Father. Grace's death doesn't change that." William looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Then stiffly he took it. The handshake was brief and formal, but it was contact. It was something. The wedding took place on a crisp December morning in Willow Creek's small church. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the town in white that softened rough edges and made everything look clean and new. Pastor Samuel Whitmore, the former Army chaplain who'd counseled Ethan through his worst grief, had agreed to officiate despite some congregational objections. Claire wore a dress of deep blue wool made by Mrs. Patterson, the seamstress, with surprising skill. Not white. White would have been inappropriate, dishonest even. This was no virginal bride marrying her first love. This was a woman who'd lived, who'd made choices and faced consequences, entering into a union with full knowledge of what it meant. Around her neck she wore Grace's locket, the one containing a miniature portrait of their mother as a young woman. A connection to her sister present, but not overwhelming. Grace would be part of this marriage, but not the foundation of it. The church held perhaps 40 people. Sheriff Thornton wearing his Sunday best. Doc Harrison, who'd delivered half the children in the territory. Jake recovered from his wounds and grinning despite the bandage still wrapped around his head. Victoria Aldridge keeping her word to attend. A scattering of ranching families who'd decided to support Ethan Holloway over social convention. Robert stood ready to give Claire away since their father had ultimately refused that role despite attending. Margaret sat in the front pew, her face carefully neutral. William sat beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. But it was Tommy who drew Claire's attention as she entered. The boy stood beside Ethan at the altar formally adopted last week through Robert's legal work. Tommy wore new clothes purchased for the occasion, his hair slicked back and his face scrubbed clean. He looked proud and terrified in equal measure, clutching the rings like they might escape if he loosened his grip. And Ethan. God, Ethan looked like someone had given him back something he'd thought lost forever. He wore his best suit, probably the same one he'd married Grace in, but Claire found she didn't mind. The past was present in every aspect of this ceremony. The key was not to let it become more important than the future. Pastor Whitmore began with words about second chances and the mysterious ways divine providence worked. His sermon was brief, aware that this congregation didn't need lengthy philosophizing. They needed legitimization of a union many found questionable, delivered by a moral authority they respected. "Marriage is not always what we expect," the pastor said. "Sometimes it comes dressed in propriety and meets all social standards. Sometimes it comes from ashes and grief forged by necessity and tempered by genuine affection. I've counseled both Ethan and Claire extensively. I've prayed over this decision, and I believe what we witness today is not scandal, but healing, not betrayal, but blessing." The vows were simple, traditional, but when Ethan spoke his promises, he added something unscripted. "I vow to honor Grace's memory while building our future. I promise to love you, Claire, not as a replacement for what I lost, but as yourself. Completely yourself. You are enough. You have always been enough. And I'm grateful beyond words that you chose to stay." Claire's own vows came through a throat tight with emotion. "I promise to stand beside you, not behind you. To challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right. To help build this land into something we can both be proud of. And to love you fiercely, without shame, without regret, for as long as we both shall live." Tommy handed over the rings with visible relief at not having dropped them. The gold bands, simple and practical like everything else in their lives, slid onto fingers work roughened and honest. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." Pastor Whitmore smiled. "Ethan, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was chaste by necessity of location, but carried the promise of deeper intimacy to come. When they broke apart, a gust of wind rattled the church windows. The doors, which had been firmly latched, swung suddenly open. Snow swirled into the chapel, dancing in the light from the windows, settling on Claire's dark hair like a blessing. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Tommy's voice, awed and wondering, "Look, the wind opened the doors, just like Miss Grace was here watching." Pastor Whitmore's face showed peaceful acceptance. "I believe she is son, and I believe she approves." No one moved to close the doors immediately. They let the winter wind blow through, carrying with it whatever spiritual presence wanted admission. Claire felt tears on her cheeks, but made no move to wipe them away. Beside her, Ethan's hand tightened on hers. "She's letting go," he murmured, too quiet for others to hear. "Giving us her blessing, telling us to be happy." The doors swung shut on their own as mysteriously as they'd opened. The moment passed, leaving behind the sense that something significant had occurred, something beyond the simple legal joining of two people. The reception at the town hall was modest but warm. Fiddle music dancing simple food that nonetheless felt like luxury after weeks of tension and uncertainty. Claire danced with Ethan, with Robert, even with Sheriff Thornton, who proved surprisingly light on his feet despite his age. She accepted congratulations from those brave enough to offer them, and ignored the pointed silences from those who disapproved. Margaret approached as the evening wore on, her expression softer than Claire had seen in years. "You look happy." "I am. Grace would be glad of that. She always wanted you to find someone who appreciated your strength." Margaret paused, choosing words carefully. "I'm sorry I didn't see sooner that this is what she would have wanted, that perhaps she planned for it in her way." "She did plan it. We found a letter, her blessing written before she died." "Then I was wrong to object." The admission clearly cost Margaret something. "I hope you'll forgive an old woman her prejudices, and that you'll visit San Francisco occasionally. Let us know our future grandchildren." The promise of acceptance, however tentative, meant more than Claire had expected. She embraced her mother, feeling years of distance begin to close. That night alone, finally in the ranch house that was now legally half hers, Claire stood in what had been Ethan's bedroom and was now theirs. He'd removed Grace's things weeks ago, packed them carefully into a trunk that now resided in the barn. Not discarded, but put away. Honored, but not enshrined. The room felt different already. Claire's few possessions mingled with Ethan's sparse belongings. Her books on the shelf beside his poetry, her brush on the dresser next to his shaving kit. Small signs of shared life beginning. Ethan entered, having banked the fires and checked the locks with the thoroughness of a man who'd defended this place through violence. He stopped when he saw her, just looked for a long moment like he was memorizing the sight of her here in his space wearing his ring. Having second thoughts. His tone was light, but she heard the genuine question beneath. Not even a first doubt. Claire moved to him, reaching up to loosen his tie. "Though I reserve the right to question your judgment when you inevitably make mistakes. I'll make plenty. Fair warning." His hands found her waist, familiar now from practice. "I'm not easy to live with. I work too hard, I don't talk enough about what I'm feeling, and I've been alone so long I've forgotten how to share space gracefully. Then we'll learn together. I'm stubborn, opinionated, and I've never run a ranch in my life. We're both gambling that we can figure this out as we go. Some gambles are worth taking." He kissed her, then deeply, with none of the restraint required by audience or propriety. Claire responded with equal intensity, her hand sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. This was her husband now, her partner, her future. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they'd faced everything since she first arrived at his gate together. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The partnership between Ethan and Claire proved more successful than either had anticipated. Her organizational skills and his practical knowledge combined to transform the ranch from a struggling operation into one of the territory's most profitable. They expanded the herd, introduced irrigation for crops, hired additional workers as the business grew. Tommy thrived under their joint guardianship. Ethan taught him the physical skills of ranching horsemanship, cattle management, basic veterinary medicine, blacksmithing. Claire educated him in reading mathematics and the kind of critical thinking that would serve him whether he stayed on the land or sought opportunities elsewhere. By his 16th birthday, the boy had become a young man any parent would be proud to claim. The town's initial scandal over their marriage faded as people witnessed the obvious success and genuine affection between Ethan and Claire. Even the most rigid moral arbiters had difficulty maintaining disapproval in the face of a couple who worked together, prospered together, and clearly loved each other without shame or pretense. In the spring of 1877, Claire discovered she was pregnant. The news brought complex emotions, joy certainly, but also fear. Memories of Grace's tragedy haunted both of them. Doc Harrison examined Claire thoroughly and pronounced her physically sound with none of the complications that had doomed Grace's pregnancy. "Every woman is different," he assured them. "Grace's condition was specific to her. Claire's built stronger, and I see no reason to expect difficulties." Still they worried. Ethan became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Claire from doing any physical work despite her protests that pregnancy wasn't illness. They argued about it with the comfortable friction of partners who knew they could disagree without threatening the foundation of their relationship. The labor when it came in early November was long and difficult, not because of any medical complication, but simply because bringing life into the world was hard. Claire endured 16 hours of pain with the kind of stubborn determination that had become her trademark. Ethan stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, encouraging her, refusing to follow convention that dictated men wait elsewhere while women handled birth. When their son finally emerged, red-faced and howling his protest at the world, Ethan broke down completely. He held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his weathered face while Doc Harrison tended to Claire. "He's perfect," Ethan kept repeating, "perfect and alive and breathing." They named him Samuel Thomas Holloway. Samuel for the pastor who'd married them. Thomas for Tommy, who'd become as much a son to them as any child of blood could be. The baby was healthy, vigorous, demanding everything a frontier child needed to be. 18 months later, twin girls arrived, Lucy and Emma, named for Claire's grandmother and Ethan's mother. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family. More rooms, more noise, more life than it had held since Ethan first built it with dreams of filling it with children. 3 years after the twins, another boy, Michael. Ethan Holloway completing their family with symmetry that felt intentional despite being simply how life unfolded. They never hid the truth from their children. Grace's portrait hung in the parlor, and the kids grew up knowing the story of their father's first wife, their aunt who'd died before they were born. The tale was told with love and respect, never shame. Grace was part of their family history, acknowledged and honored, but not elevated above the living. Tommy grew to manhood under their roof, eventually marrying the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Ethan gifted him a section of land to start his own operation, but Tommy remained close, helping manage the expanded Holloway ranch that now employed over a dozen workers. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan surprised Claire with a journey to the coast. They traveled with all 4 children to see the Pacific Ocean, that vast expanse of water neither had witnessed before. They stood together on the sand, watching their children play in the waves, marveling at how far they'd come from that autumn evening when Claire had appeared at the gate carrying letters and grief. "Did you ever imagine this?" Claire asked, her hand in his as wind whipped her hair loose from its pins. "When I showed up 3 years after Grace died, did you think we'd end up here? Not even in my wildest dreams." Ethan's arm circled her waist, drawing her close against the ocean chill. "I thought I was done. Thought I'd live out my days alone working land I'd eventually lose because there was no one to pass it to. You changed everything. We changed everything. Together." Little Michael, nearly 4 now, and fearless, came running up with a shell he'd found. "Papa, Mama, look what the ocean gave me." Ethan knelt to examine the treasure with appropriate seriousness. "That's a fine shell, son. We'll take it home, put it somewhere special. Can we come back?" The boy's eyes were bright with excitement. "Can we see the ocean again?" "Someday, when you're older." Ethan glanced up at Claire, and the look they shared held the weight of years and promises kept. This family has a lot of life ahead of it yet. That night, after the children were asleep in the rented rooms and the ocean's roar had become familiar background, Ethan and Claire stood on a balcony watching stars compete with the moon's reflection on water. "I have something for you," Ethan said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "Found it last month when we were clearing out the old storage shed. Must have fallen behind some boxes years ago." Claire took the envelope, recognizing Grace's handwriting immediately. It was addressed simply, "To my family." "I haven't read it," Ethan continued. "Thought we should read it together." Claire opened the envelope, carefully aware this was likely the last communication they'd ever receive from Grace. The letter inside was brief, dated shortly before Grace's death. "My dearest ones, if you're reading this, then my hopes have been realized. You've found each other. You've built the family I couldn't give you. You've filled that beautiful ranch house with the laughter and chaos of children who'll grow up knowing both mountain and sky. I need you to understand something that took me too long to learn. Love doesn't diminish by being shared. It multiplies. The love I had for Ethan doesn't make your love less real or valuable. If anything, it makes it more precious. You're building on a foundation of genuine affection, not just passion or convenience. Teach your children well. Teach them that strength comes in many forms, that failure isn't final, that sometimes the hardest thing to do is ask for help, but also the most important. Teach them to be honest about their feelings before silence builds walls too high to scale. And on difficult days when the work feels endless and the challenges overwhelming, remember that you're not just building a ranch, you're creating a legacy. Every fence post driven, every lesson taught, every meal shared around that table, you're weaving something that will outlast you both, something that will echo through generations. Be happy. Be so very happy. You've earned it. My love to you all, Grace." They stood in silence, letting Grace's words settle. Claire felt tears on her cheeks but made no move to wipe them away. Beside her, Ethan's breathing had gone rough. "She really did plan this," Claire said finally. "From the beginning. She sent me to you knowing we'd find each other. She was always smarter than both of us." Ethan's voice was thick. "Saw possibilities we couldn't imagine. Do you think she knows? Wherever she is, do you think she can see what we've built? I think if there's any justice in the universe, she does, and I think she's proud." He turned to face Claire, fully framing her face with his work-roughened hands. "I loved Grace. I'll always love the memory of who she was. But Claire, what I feel for you, what we've built together, it's not less than what I had before. It's different. It's ours. And it's enough. It's more than enough." Claire covered his hands with hers. "It's everything." They sealed the sentiment with a kiss, Grace's blessing wrapped around them like the ocean wind. When they broke apart, Ethan carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. "We'll save this," he said. "Add it to the others. So someday when our children are grown and asking questions about their history, they'll have the whole story. The pain and the healing, the loss and the finding, all of it." "All of it," Claire agreed. Several years after Michael's birth, when Claire was 36, the most significant test of her strength arrived. She was pregnant again unexpectedly. The pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, her body less resilient than it had been in her 20s and early 30s. Doc Harrison monitored her, carefully noting warning signs that concerned him. The labor began a month early on a cold March night, with snow falling thick and fast. Ethan sent Tommy riding for the doctor while he stayed with Claire, his face showing the kind of terror that came from having lived through this scenario before, with tragic results. "I'm not Grace," Claire gasped between contractions. "This is different. I'm going to be fine." "You better be. I can't lose you." Ethan's usual stoicism had cracked completely. "Claire, I can't do this without you." "You won't have to. I'm too stubborn to die giving birth." She managed a weak smile despite the pain. "Now hold my hand and stop looking like you're at a funeral." The labor was brutal. For hours, Claire fought to bring their child into the world while Ethan held her hand and Doc Harrison worked with calm efficiency. Several times the old doctor's face showed concern, but he never wavered. Finally, as dawn broke pale and cold through the windows, a baby's cry pierced the air. "A son," Doc Harrison announced, holding up a tiny wrinkled infant. "Small, but his lungs work fine." They named him Daniel Ethan Holloway, after Ethan's father, and to honor the new life they'd fought so hard to bring into the world. When Ethan held the baby, his face showed the same overwhelming relief and joy that had marked the birth of their first child. But this time there was also acknowledgement of what this represented: the breaking of a curse, the final exorcism of Grace's tragedy. "We made it through," he said to Claire, who lay exhausted but triumphant in their bed. "All of us. We're going to be fine. I told you I'm too stubborn to die." "That you did." He leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Remind me never to doubt you again." The epilogue of their story played out over the following decades. The ranch continued to prosper. Their children grew into capable adults who understood the value of hard work and honest dealing. Tommy's own children visited frequently, playing with their cousins and learning the same lessons Ethan had once taught an orphaned boy. On a warm autumn evening 15 years after their wedding, Ethan and Claire stood once more at the gate where she'd first appeared, carrying grief and forgiveness. They were older now, both showing silver in their hair and lines earned through years of sun and labor. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with lamplight filled with the sounds of family gathering for Sunday dinner. "Do you ever regret it?" Claire asked. "Saying yes when I offered that partnership, taking on a city woman who knew nothing about ranching. Every single day." Ethan's tone was serious until she looked up and saw the teasing glint in his eyes. "Regret that I didn't ask sooner, that I wasted even a moment hesitating. Liar. About hesitating, maybe a little, but about regret, never." He pulled her close, this woman who'd come to forgive him and stayed to love him. "We built something worth having, Claire, something that'll outlast us both. Grace would be proud." "Grace is proud. I feel it sometimes, like she's watching over all of this and smiling." He gestured toward the house, toward the land they'd fought for, toward the life they'd created. "This is what she wanted, for both of us." Inside the house they could hear Tommy calling that dinner was ready, the children's voices rising in typical argument about who got to sit where. The comfortable chaos of a large family gathered together, the sounds of legacy being lived in real time. "We should go in," Claire said, but made no move to leave the gate. "In a minute." Ethan turned to look at the valley spreading before them, painted in the golds and oranges of sunset. "I want to remember this moment, this feeling, everything we've built, standing right here at the place where it all began." They stood together as darkness crept across the land, two people who'd found each other in grief and built something lasting from shared sorrow. The gate that had once marked the boundary of Ethan's isolation now opened onto a life fuller than either had imagined possible. Behind them, Tommy appeared on the porch. "You two planning to eat tonight, or should we start without you?" "Coming." Ethan took Claire's hand, lacing their fingers together in the familiar gesture that had become second nature over 15 years of partnership. "Just saying thank you." "To who?" "To Grace, for sending you, for giving us her blessing, for being wise enough to see what we couldn't." They walked back to the house together toward warmth and family and the future they'd created, one hard choice at a time. The gate remained open behind them, no longer needed to keep the world at bay. They'd learned that the strongest defense wasn't walls and distance, but rather the bonds of family and community built through honest work and genuine care. That night, after the meal was finished and the family had departed and the children were asleep in their beds, Ethan and Claire sat on their porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars Grace had loved unchanged despite the years that had passed. "I think love is like those stars," Claire said quietly. "It doesn't matter how many you see, Each one shines independently, and none of them diminish the other's light. When did you get so philosophical? Living with you. Must be catching. She leaned her head on his shoulder. But I'm serious. What you had with Grace, what we have together, they're both real, both valuable, both worthy of honor. I know. Ethan's arm came around her shoulders. Took me a long time to believe it, but I know now. Love doesn't have to be exclusive to be genuine. Good. Because I'd hate to think I was competing with a memory. No competition. Grace lives in our history. You're my present and my future. He paused, then added with characteristic honesty, though I reserve the right to remember her fondly without it meaning I love you less. Deal. As long as I get to remain impossibly stubborn without you suggesting it's unladylike. Claire, after 15 years I wouldn't know what to do with a properly ladylike wife. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the truest love stories don't follow conventional paths. That healing can come from unexpected sources. That forgiveness opens more doors than pride or pain ever could. Behind them in the house they'd built and defended and filled with life, Grace's portrait hung in its place of honor. Not forgotten, not displaced. Simply part of the larger story they were still writing together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of grace, building upon the last, until it became something none of them could have predicted, but all of them had helped create. The forgiveness that had brought Claire to the gate had transformed into something richer and more complex. Partnership, love, family, legacy. All of it possible because two people had been brave enough to choose life over grief, hope over fear, and each other over the safer path of solitude. The Montana night deepened around them, vast and full of promise, while inside their home the next generation slept dreaming whatever dreams children dream. And somewhere in whatever place the dead go to watch over the living, Grace smiled.